So we're back at the New York Film Festival, the 58th New York Film Festival, and I'm here with Lisa Cortés and Liz Garbus. You've just had a chance to watch their film, and now is an opportunity for us to talk about the making of the film, the issues that the film raises, the urgent questions it asks about our democracy, and the urgent actions that it inspires. So we're going to dig into all of that, but let me just go back to the very beginning with this film, Liz and Lisa, and tell us, just give us some of the origin story. Tell us how this question of a question that I don't think many of us expected we'd have to be asking in 2020 necessarily, but that we are about the safety of our democracy as it relates to voting and voting rights. How did this conversation begin for you, and how did it go from a conversation to the first steps towards making it into a film?
You know, I think that after the election of 2016, a lot of filmmakers, including myself, and I'm sure Lisa too, asked ourselves, you know, what is our role in this moment as storytellers and filmmakers? And for me, the first thing that I did was I ended up making a film within the New York Times, which turned into a 4-part series about the press in the moment of Trump. And I had thought about making a film about voting. And I had, realized that a lot of the kind of narrative around the 2016 election, that a lot of people, we were missing the forest for the trees. We talked a lot about these swing states and the Comey letter and the Russian interference, but the thing that people weren't talking about was the fact that the 2016 presidential election was the first election without the protections of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And that reality could not be dismissed. People said, oh, Black folks didn't turn out the way that they did for Obama, but there's a long story behind that. But then a few years later, I never quite figured out how to tell the story or make the film. And then a couple of years later, we get a call from an agent saying, Stacey Abrams is interested in spearheading a film about the fight for voting rights in America. Would you be interested? And I literally thought it was like a prank call. I was like, wait, Stacey, I had followed her raise. I was such a huge fan of hers. She was such a transformative figure, inspired so much hope. And of course, devastation when she did not become governor. But and then we ended up sitting with her, myself and my husband, Dan Cogan, and talking about this film. And happily, she decided to work with us. My first call was then to Lisa Cortés to come along on this journey, which Lisa, brought all of her brilliance and passion to this project. And that's essentially how it all started. Yeah.
I muted myself, so it wouldn't be any background noise. Lisa, tell me about that first conversation with Liz, and then tell me about the early conversations with Stacey that the two of you had in sort of framing the approach you would take.
When Liz called me, I also thought it was a prank call. What an incredible convergence, to be involved as an artist in creating work that is so important and necessary, to work with a filmmaker that I have such tremendous regard for, who, as we know, Liz has like this long history. And it was a weird, almost full circle moment. One of my first films that I worked on was Monsters Ball, that I shot at Angola. And Liz's film, The Farm, takes place there. So I was like, this is interesting kismet. I guess it's not a prank call. And I'm ready to do whatever and sign on to go on this journey with you. And that's what I loved about the call. It was about, I want to work, let us do this together and to frame and to this story. And could you meet with Stacey Abrams? After I scraped myself off the floor with like this great congruence of all these wonderful things, I was like, fine, and I'm there, and in that meeting, Stacy was so generous with sharing information and also curious about the filmmaking process that I knew with her involved as talent and but also as a producer, that we really had a great foundation to go forth and to find a way to unpack hundreds of years into our story.
Yeah, I forgot about that. How I was like, okay, great, let's do this. But first, just can you go meet Stacy? Like, yeah. That was fun.
Liz, tell me about that first conversation. Actually, let's go back one step to the conversation you had, the very first conversation you had with Stacy after her reps reached out to you. Tell me about the ideas that you sort of laid down as a foundation in the earliest conversations about this film.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I did a lot of listening, hearing from Stacy. One of the things that Stacy said in that first meeting was, she said, so oftentimes folks show up at the polls and they're told, oh, you're not registered here, or you already voted, or, sorry, we can't find your record. And people go home and they think, I did something wrong. I must not have filled out some form, or maybe when I moved, I didn't do the right thing, whatever they think, right? However they rationalize that disenfranchising moment there. And what was so important to express in this film was that, no, that's a feature, not a bug of the system, right? And to kind of and to really frame the fact that the United States is the only democracy which makes its citizens jump through hoops just to be included in that democracy. So it was very important to kind of show the long tail of voter suppression. And I started to think about it as like a monster movie, where every time you think you've like slayed the dragon, it comes up again, and it may look a little different. Maybe it even looks sort of benign or bureaucratic for a second, but it's actually doing the same damage. So I did a lot of listening. I also shared with her, I think for a lot of white folks, we don't experience voter suppression, right? We go to the polls, we come back 45 minutes later, and a lot of white people believe it's a myth, and we also, a lot of white folks believe that voter fraud is the bigger danger to our democracy. And, I think that my own history and my father's work as an ACLU lawyer in the 60s, one of his cases he used to tell us about at the dinner table was the case of a woman named Henrietta Wright, who went to register to vote 20 days after the passage of the Voting Rights Act, and was arrested for ostensibly going through a stop sign on her way home. There was no stop sign between the courthouse and her way home, but she was jailed and beaten and sent to a mental institution the next day. So I think that while my own personal lived experience didn't belie the kind of voting problems that so many people in this country face, I knew it was because of my white privilege that was happening. So I think that we were able to exchange ideas like that in that initial conversation.
Mm. Lisa, tell me about creating a roadmap for the film. Tell me about the early conversations that you all had as you were thinking about, you have Stacy in your corner, but you're thinking about the other voices and the other stories that you're going to explore in order to kind of paint the bigger picture. Tell me about how you sort of started that process collaboratively.
Well, in our first meeting with Stacy collectively, one of the things she shared was the architecture of voter suppression. Can you register? Can you cast your ballot? And can your vote be counted? So we knew that was kind of on a meta level, one of the threads we wanted to look at. And then, of course, the next step was to create the historical timeline, to kind of find those kind of seminal moments that spoke to the architecture. And then Liz and I started talking about some of the verite stories that we could follow that would show you that, you know, there's not only the Florida vagrancy laws of 1868, there is also Amendment 4, Desmond Meade and his work with the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. And for those of you who don't know, you know, Florida is one of the couple of states where if you are a returning citizen, you've served your time, they require you to, you were not allowed to vote. And so Amendment 4 was led by Desmond Meade, and it overturned and gave access to the vote. But as recently as a week ago, you know, the state legislature has pushed back and is requiring all returning citizens to pay their fines. In some cases, they don't even know how much someone owes, but they're holding people hostage and limiting their access to the franchise. But I mean, like, so we then started to see the contemporary stories that were uniquely tied to this history going back to the inception of our country. And I think that that's where kind of both the history, the present, and then Stacey Abrams' 2018 campaign all started to find a place as storytellers of interweaving and threading what is the unique to voter suppression and how it has continuously morphed through time, but always resurfaces.
Mm.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I mean, building on what Lisa said, I mean, that was exactly the Florida story is such a good example of how we structured the film, right? So you come out of Reconstruction with 4 million free people who are voting and participating in democracy, as you saw in this film, and all of a sudden, whoa, there's like Black senators and Black governors, you know, and the white, you know, the white folks and the white people in power get freaked out. What do? You create laws that criminalize their very existence, like vagrancy laws, as Lisa mentioned, and being able to tie that, you know, the deep root, the deep history to what's happening today in Florida. And as Lisa said just last week, a court overturned the will of the people. 64% of Floridians agreed that once you've served your time, you can return and exercise your citizenship. And the state legislature and then the courts went in and overturned the voice of the people. So it's you know, history is repeating itself, but that also doesn't mean that we're not hopeful, because despite, you know, Stacey's crushing loss in her race, 2018 saw great voter turnout and a lot of firsts of people becoming elected who were either progressive or, you know, the first folks of color in their communities to be elected. So there is also reason for hope. And, you know, as Stacey says, the best way to fight voter suppression is voter turnout. And that's what we got to do.
You embarked on this film with, I assume you embarked on this film with an end game. You knew you wanted it, I'm assuming you knew you wanted it to be relevant to this upcoming election. So you had an end date in mind, right? Help me understand that thought process, the conversations you had, and responding to that urgency, making something with a narrow window of time in which to get it out to an audience.
Well, we certainly had a timeline that we backed into. We did push as much until the end to be able to capture both Wisconsin and Georgia, and what it is, those moments, as everyone saw, of voting during a pandemic. It was, you know, a crazy pivot that we made because we finished our final interview, I guess a week before lockdown. And our team was all over the world, literally, but was, you know, everyone is super dedicated, and we just knew the timeliness of the message and when the film would need to come out. And I think that was a great driver for us to hit our mark.
Yeah, and I'll say that, you know, I want to mention, and I should have shouted out at the beginning to Amazon Studios and Ted Hope, who really championed our film when we first started pitching it. And, you know, we had other interests besides Amazon, but one of the things was that Amazon was fully committed to helping us, you know, get it out in this season that we wanted to get it out in, and get it out. You know, at that point, it was going to be, you know, theatrically as well as online, and also embracing like a really robust impact outreach program, which we've developed. And we started, oftentimes I've finished films and then we start working on the outreach campaign. We started the outreach campaign and got those folks working and funded alongside us as we were making the film. Because we really, you know, are hoping that this film will break out of, you know, the traditional expected documentary audiences who we love and appreciate, but we also want to make sure we're reaching folks who don't always turn to documentaries. And you know, I think part of the reason, Eugene, is that it's not like you have to know what, you know, the Voting Rights Act was or Shelby County versus Holder in order to cast your ballot this November. But what we do want you to know is not just how hard you're, like, whose shoulders we're standing on. We know John Lewis, and we know the ancestors that fought so hard for this vote, but just to instill this kind of righteous indignation that the system is trying to take something that's yours and don't let them, you know, and that is, you know, and regardless of how you vote, and regardless of, you know, everybody who fought for this, really the moment now is about you and is about your own future. And it's about, you know, protecting what's yours, and that kind of righteous anger that one should feel when people are trying to eliminate your voice from the conversation. I mean, that's how communities end up without clean water. That's how, you know, mayors can hire the police that, you know, that doesn't fit their community. You know, all of these local issues are on the ballot, as well as who's president. And we want Americans to feel inspired to protect that right. And that's why we wanted to get it out when we did.
As we, in the 3 or 4 minutes we have left for this conversation, I have a two-part question, and that is, as we record this conversation, it's the middle of September. Folks will be watching this conversation this week, but also as they, you know, as the film goes out, this conversation will be out on our social media channels and our platforms, so that folks can turn to this opportunity to learn more about the film. I'd love to know, at this moment in mid-September, what concerns you on the one hand, but also what gives you hope? You've had an inside look at the process, the people, the issues and ideas that are driving that will drive not only voter turnout, but so many related conversations. So what concerns you at this moment? What gives you hope? And the second part of the question is, what can folks do? What are some of the resources that folks that are watching this and learning about this and have just watched your film, we see some of it in the film itself, but maybe hit home what some of the resources are that are available to folks in the run up to the election, certainly.
Well, concern is the setting expectations. You know, we all feel that we will not have results immediately following the election, but I think we have to stay calm and vigilant, and not lean into any kind of apathy that says, well, my vote doesn't count. There's no space for that. I'm certainly energized by, as we travel around the country, we have a bus tour happening where we are registering people to vote. We're screening the film. The response has been fantastic, and particularly engagement with young folks. So we know that progress takes time, but progress has occurred. I'll pass the mic to Liz before I come back with takeaways.
Okay. Well, I think a concern is, I think we really have to they can't be within cheating distance. You know, that's my concern. That there is already all this conversation about rigging and fraud and this, and I believe that we have the will of the people is, you know, we saw it in 2018. I believe that we will win this election, but we have to win by a large margin. Otherwise, it's going to be a painful 6 to 8 weeks of litigation and unrest. That is my concern. But if people turn out the way they did in 2018, the way they did for Barack Obama, and then I think we're going to be okay. And, you know, hopefulness is, and I mentioned this before, like, while you look at what happened in Georgia and people say, you know, we did turn out for Stacey Abrams, but still, you know, still I had to wait 8 hours, or when I got there, they told me my ballot didn't count. That's true. But there are a lot of other examples that we don't, you know, that are where, you know, folks were elected with great numbers who were transformative candidates. So that's the cause for hope. And for takeaways, I know that Lisa is going to talk about our amazing website where you can find all those voter tools. So I'll turn it back to her, but I'm optimistic.
Well, I have to quote the great James Brown. You got to get into it. You got to get involved, and go to allinforvoting.com. There are resources there to help you figure out if you're registered, to most importantly, help you make a plan. That is the key. So make a plan for yourself, and then call 5 other people, and then figure out how you are going to help those family members who might have obstacles, make certain that their vote is counted, whether it's with an absentee ballot or early voting. It's really about the plan. And I think if you do that, you will be well armed to engage and have your voice represented.
And I'll add one more thing. You can also, for folks who have their plan and they've made those 5 calls, there's more you can do. You can become a poll worker. That's also on our site. And one thing I think for New Yorkers, if a lot of New Yorkers are watching this and they want to be more involved, we have a great state next door, Pennsylvania, where voter turnout is a huge issue. You know, there are many, many more registered Democrats than Republicans in Pennsylvania, but turnout has been low. So I'm certain that's kind of where I'm dedicating my energy, and I've been posting on my social media channels like ways to get involved in Pennsylvania, which shouldn't be too hard for New Yorkers if you've got a few days here and there to volunteer.
The film is All In, The Fight for Democracy. Filmmakers are Liz Garbus and Lisa Cortés. Thank you for not only talking about the film and the issues and the ideas behind it today. Thank you for sharing it with us at the New York Film Festival. And best of luck and strength as you're taking this film out into the world to as wide an audience as possible. I wish you absolutely all the best, because it's gonna mean a lot for all of us. So thank you for engaging this topic so deeply and passionately too.
Thank you, Eugene. We're so honored to be here. Thank you.